On a summer day in 1973, federal court in Brooklyn was waiting for one man. His name was Frank Matthews. Prosecutors were ready. The case was already massive. The money trail stretched from New York to Las Vegas. The drug network touched city after city. But Matthews never walked through the door. He was gone. Not late, not hiding in the hallway, gone. And once the government realized that, one of the biggest narcotics cases in America turned into something stranger, a manhunt with no ending. This is a historical documentary based on court records, published reporting, and archival summaries. Matthews was accused by federal authorities and described in appellate records as central to a major narcotics conspiracy. His disappearance remains unresolved, and this episode separates what the record says from what people still speculate. That matters here, because the Matthews story has been repeated for 50 years with numbers, rumors, and theories that sometimes get treated like fact. We are going to stay with the record where the record exists and mark the mystery where it does not. Before the federal files, before the Brooklyn apartments, before the stories about millions in cash, Frank Matthews came out of Durham, North Carolina. The later myth makes him sound like he appeared fully formed in New York. He did not. He came from the segregated South, moved north, and learned that money could change how people saw you. Durham gave him the first chapter, but New York gave him the stage. And by the time Matthews found that stage, the old rules of the street economy were already starting to bend. In New York, Matthews moved through the numbers world and the street economy. The city already had older powers controlling the heroin trade. Italian crime, families, older gambling figures, and established suppliers all understood one thing. Harlem and Brooklyn were markets, and markets meant control. But Matthews came up in a moment when a new kind of operator could see the weak points. He did not need to own every corner. He needed supply, loyalty, and a structure that could move product faster than law enforcement could understand it. The story that follows Matthews is not just that he sold drugs, it is that he refused to stay under the old structure. Crime writers and historians describe him as a man who worked around traditional mob control, building direct supply lines and his own network of Black and Hispanic lieutenants. That independence is why his name still carries weight. In the old underworld, permission mattered, territory mattered. Matthews seemed to understand that if he could get close enough to the source, the old gatekeepers became less powerful. The appellate record says Matthews principally orchestrated importation from connections abroad, largely from Venezuela. That one detail changes the scale. This was not a corner operation. The government described a structure with suppliers, couriers, receivers, cutting agents, and lieutenants moving product into multiple states. That is the difference between a dealer and an organization. The street saw the retail end. The court record saw the machinery behind it: routes, alts, apartments, cash, phones, and people trusted to keep moving even when one piece got watched. It also explains why the government cares so much. A local dealer can be replaced. A supply network can reshape the economics of an entire region. Court records named one Brooklyn apartment at 925 Prospect Street. Inside the organization, it had a nickname, the Ponderosa. Prosecutors said it was one of the drug mills where narcotics were diluted, packaged, and moved back into the network. The nickname sounds almost casual, but what it represented was not casual at all. It was the industrial side of the business, hidden inside ordinary city housing, where the street product became inventory and the inventory became money. Maryland, Pennsylvania, Ohio, New York, North Carolina. The record names those places and says there were other locations too. That is the part that made Matthews different. He was not just feeding one neighborhood. He was building a wholesale network that could survive across distance. Every city added money, but every city also added risk. Couriers, phones, apartments, loose mouths, and police departments that might notice the same pattern from a different angle. By the time investigators understood the shape of it, they were not just asking who sold what. They were asking who supplied whom, who collected, who cut, who transported, and who had the authority to make the whole thing move. The case began to open because somebody noticed the ordinary details. A New York detective lived in the same Brooklyn building where Matthews and Barbara Hinton kept an apartment. He saw people coming and going, paper bags, attaché cases, suitcases, too many visits, too much movement, too much money passing through one place. That is how big cases often start, not with a movie-style betrayal, but with a small observation that refuses to stop making sense. From there, surveillance expanded. Investigators watched other locations tied to Matthews and his people. They followed movement from Brooklyn to the Bronx, to Staten Island. The government was no longer looking at isolated street sales. It was trying to map an organization. And mapping an organization means patience. You watch the same door again and again. You write down license plates. You learn who arrives empty and who leaves heavy. Then slowly the pattern becomes a case. In 1972, authorities obtained court-ordered wiretaps. That is when a street story became a wire story. Calls, names, locations, coded conversations, and careless moments started turning into evidence. Wiretaps do not just capture crime. They capture rhythm. Who calls first? Who answers quickly? Who gives orders without saying too much? For prosecutors, those rhythms helped turn a network that was built on silence into something a jury could follow. Searches followed. In the appellate record, one Brooklyn apartment produced cutting equipment, narcotics, cases of quinine, and about $148,000 in cash. That number is not myth, that number is in the record, and it matters because it shows the scale in a way legend cannot. A rumor can say millions, a search return can show the machinery, cash on hand, tools of the trade, and the physical proof that this was not just talk. Then came Las Vegas. According to published summaries, federal agents arrested Matthews in January 1973 at McCarran International Airport. The money trail had led west, where authorities believed cash was being laundered through casino connections and safety deposit boxes. Las Vegas changes the mood of the story. New York was supply and distribution. Vegas was cash, distance, and the possibility of disappearing in plain sight among gamblers, hotel rooms, and money that already moved fast. For investigators, that mattered because drug money becomes harder to read once it moves into a city built around cash. Chips, rooms, accounts, boxes, names on paper, and names not on paper. It was the perfect place for wealth to blur. The numbers around the case became part of the legend. Reports describe a $5 million bail figure in Las Vegas, then a later release on $325,000 bail in New York. The message was clear. The government believed Matthews had access to money on a scale most defendants could not imagine. Bail is supposed to bring a person back to court. In this case, it became the last door Matthews walked through before the story broke loose from the justice system. By the summer of 1973, Matthews was supposed to answer the case in Brooklyn. The government had built a sprawling file, but the courtroom can only work if the defendant appears. Matthews did not. That one absence changed everything. The indictment still existed. The evidence still existed. The people around him still had to face consequences. But the man at the center of the story stepped out of reach before the public could hear the whole case tested in open court. The disappearance story includes Cheryl Denise Brown, Matthews' girlfriend. Published accounts say the two vanished together. After that, the line between record and rumor gets thin. There are claims about Houston, North Carolina, the Bahamas, Africa, and death. None of those endings has closed the case, and that is why the final third of this story feels different. The rise has documents, the investigation has wiretaps, the disappearance has shadows. Every theory says something different about what people want this story to be. If he escaped, he becomes the outlaw who beat the system. If he was killed, he becomes another man who mistook money for protection. If he lived under another name, he becomes almost impossible to separate from legend. One of the most repeated details is almost cinematic. Agents chasing a tip to a North Carolina bank, only to be told they had just missed him. It sounds like a movie scene because history sometimes leaves behind the exact detail a storyteller would have invented. But after that, the trail goes cold. No confirmed interview, no confirmed grave, no final frame. If he lived better than almost any fugitive in American crime history. If he died, then the secret died with whoever made it happen. Matthews disappeared, but the case did not. His associates still face the system. The appellate decision that survives today is not a legend. It is a legal record of what prosecutors proved against people around him, and it is one of the clearest windows into how the organization worked. That is important because Matthews' absence can make the story feel like folklore. The paperwork pulls it back to earth. People were charged. Evidence was argued. Convictions were reviewed. The file kept moving even without him. In a strange way, that surviving record is the closest thing the public has to the trial Matthews never gave them. The reason Frank Matthews still matters is not only the money, it is the unanswered ending. Most kingpin stories end in prison, cooperation, or death. Matthews' story ends with absence, no courtroom confession, no prison interview, no confirmed grave, just a file that never got its final page. That missing page is powerful. It lets people project whatever ending they want. Genius, escape, quiet exile, betrayal, murder, witness protection, new identity. The record does not give us permission to choose one, and maybe that is why he remains more mythic than people who moved more money or left more bodies behind. The ending never forced the audience to stop imagining. The absence creates a problem. Every year without an answer makes the myth bigger. Some people want Matthews to be the man who beat the government. Others assume he was killed before he could spend the money. The truth is less satisfying. The public record does not know, and a good documentary has to live with that. The mystery is real, but mystery is not proof. The legend is loud, but the archive is quieter, and usually more honest. Frank Matthews did not disappear from history. He disappeared into it. The court record shows the machine he helped build. The archive shows the federal chase. The money's years show the part nobody can prove. And that is why, 50 years later, the case still feels unfinished. Maybe that is the real ending. Not a body, not a prison cell, not a confession, but a question that outlived the empire. The government could describe the organization, writers could describe the legend, but nobody could produce Frank Matthews. If you want the next forgotten case from the files, drop the name below. This has been CrimeTownTV.